Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. A major development going into the Chinese Grand Prix with the FIA reportedly furious with many of the Formula 1 teams exploiting what we are calling Mini-DRS at the Australian Grand Prix. They put sensors on the car and they have decided, yes, teams are exploiting the rules, effectively cheating some of these static load tests, and changes will be made for just a couple of days' time in China. Red Bull are convinced this is one of the key reasons that will slow McLaren down. Is that the entire picture? What are the teams going to do about it? Because they've got to make serious changes in just a matter of days. Very much into your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. As always, I would greatly appreciate it. Plenty to get into today. It is the Chinese Grand Prix this weekend. It is also a sprint weekend, as you guys can see on the graphic here. So we're back in China for another sprint. It's going to be fascinating, to say the very least, especially with the changes that we're going to discuss today. Lots of drama in F1 yesterday, starting here really. So Isaac Hadjar, he had a very difficult Grand Prix. It only lasted a couple of corners. Don't want to laugh really, but it was pretty funny, as tragic as it was. Obviously, he was gutted about it. I feel bad for him, as do many. Although, Helmut Marko doesn't. And this is the thing with Marko, right? Like, I understand why he is the way that he is. But I think the way that Marko is doesn't, to me, seem particularly conducive to having a great relationship with younger drivers. Like, you look at the grid on Sunday, or on the race day, and you look at the drivers that were out of the Grand Prix early. You're looking at the likes of Hadjar. You're looking at Lawson having a difficult time. Even Jack Doohan, who was in the Red Bull program for some time, obviously Max Verstappen was right up there at the front, but over the last few years, Red Bull have never really been able to successfully develop talent other than Verstappen and maybe Arvid Lindblad, who's coming through as well, who is very promising indeed. But even, the Albon days, the Kvyat days, the Gasly days, nothing really worked out, and all the guys they brought through the junior program, pretty much with the exception of Tsunoda, who they're not even giving the credit that he deserves anyway, it just doesn't work out at Red Bull. And you've got to think that Marko's attitude at times doesn't necessarily help. Like, when a driver has had a difficult moment and needs maybe building up, that's not Helmut Marko's standard response. And he says that Hadjar's tearful show, as he described it, was a bit embarrassing, which I was like, oh my god. I mean, look, I'm not expecting Marko to have much compassion, but you might think that a different attitude might actually help some of your drivers at some point. And I think this is, the Anthony Hamilton response was, to me, the far superior approach to this situation. I thought was very gentlemanly. And equally, I think it's an approach that will probably get the best out of a driver in the longer term, rather than this Helmut Marko approach of he's crying, he's emotional, he's upset about making a mistake. Guess he just doesn't have that dog in him. Let's just kick him out of the team. That seems to be the way that Marko speaks a lot of the time. So that was causing a lot of drama yesterday, and for good reason. But to be fair to Marko, he is a big fan of Yuki Tsunoda, and reportedly he did actually want Yuki in the Red Bull last year, but Horner preferred Lawson. But we know that he is a big fan of Yuki. The thing is, I don't know if Yuki's going to have much opportunity to stay around, because Honda seemingly aren't going to support him too much longer either. And I think Yuki's just got to put his head down and take the positives from this weekend, because as Marko says, Yuki didn't make any mistakes. It was a great weekend, a perfect performance. He defended sixth in a commendable way. Unfortunately, the pit crew had to make a difficult decision in difficult circumstances, and it didn't work out. They bottled it. Basically, they did the Ferrari strategy, which is very rarely a good idea, as we'll discuss in the coming minutes as well. But I think Yuki, the car is better than expected. That's first up. Certainly for me, I was not expecting the Racing Bulls to be that competitive in Australia. And then Yuki just killed it all weekend, apart from his team making a terrible call, which put him out of the points. So he can take the positives away. People are noticing Tsunoda's performances, and probably Red Bull should be as well. Even Zach Brown took the opportunity to criticise Horner and said, look, Yuki did a great job. I think this was after qualifying, but the same applies really after the race. Probably the guy that should be in the Red Bull if you look at how he performed, but they seem to make some strange driver choices from time to time. So Zach Brown, the thing is with Zach Brown, right, you give him a winning car, a winning machine, and a winning team, he is going to talk, and he is going to love every single second of it. Just wanted to mention this real quick. So Andrea Antonelli delivered, and I don't really want to talk about it too much, because I want to see more from him, and I'm so excited for his future, but genuinely, that drive on Sunday, given the conditions and how treacherous it was, and how many great drivers are really struggling out there, there. The drive that he delivered, and yes, he got fortunate with the pit stop and the timing and the other teams messing up, and, absolutely. But that performance was genuinely, for a driver on debut, one of the most impressive rookie performances that I think we've ever seen, frankly, in Formula One. I mean, people were comparing it to Hamilton's drive in 2007 at the Australian Grand Prix and other such excellent rookie drives as well, such as from the other Kimi back in the day. But the story, but those conditions, like let's say Hamilton 2007, amazing drive in the McLaren, but, they weren't as treacherous as what we saw on this Sunday, right? So, not to take anything away from Hamilton's, opening debut rookie performance, it's just Antonelli's drive was just sensational in every sense of the word. And this is a move I wanted to share for you guys. I probably can't play, the whole thing because, copyright and stuff, but I will go through it because you guys might not have seen this. This was his move on Alex Albon. We didn't get this on the broadcast, which was, I think, unfortunate. But so here he goes on Albon. Albon defends the inside, and Antonelli goes around the outside in the wet into the turn 9, turn 10 chicane and just sends it into the corner. Absolute 100% full commitment. Belief that Albon's going to back out. And this is the thing with these kids, especially Antonelli. He has unbelievable confidence and just the ability and the willingness and the talent to just go for it, right? And it's something that you don't see. A lot of rookies will be a bit more reserved, but the fact that he will just send it unashamedly into every corner and just have full confidence that he's going to make it stick is so fun to watch. And that move around the outside of Albon into turn 9, turn 10, okay, it wasn't quite Piastri Hamilton, they actually went side by side, but Antonelli went alongside Albon and was like, you know what, I'm making this move stick, I'm just going to send it in and Albon's going to back out, which is exactly what he did. He took the position and eventually held on to it, of course, because the penalty was eventually revoked. So, yeah, exciting stuff, I think. And look, there will be crashes, there will be moments, there will be issues that Antonelli faces, but he is one of the most exciting drivers to have hit this sport for some time, for very good reason, in my opinion. Now, it was not so clear for Hamilton, right, because he spent a lot of the race behind Albon, and Antonelli got by, as we saw at the end there. He had a lot of trickery, let's say, managing the relationship with his race engineer, Riccardo Adami, because he was on the radio all the time saying, look, you've got K1, and K1 is the Ferrari use of basically the battery deployment. Hamilton, of course, knew that he had this deployment, but he was looking to use it in a way that could actually advantage him, because a lot of the time he was like, look, I'm too far back to use this energy effectively right now. Stop telling me, I know that I can turn it on. And this is what he said, please leave it, mate. I'm learning the car as I go. Just leave me to it, it's not an issue. Now, after the race, Hamilton said, Ricciardo did a really good job. We're learning about each other bit by bit. After this, we'll download, go through the comments, things that I said and things that he said, etc., etc. Generally, I'm not one that likes a lot of information in the race unless I need it and ask for it. He did his best today and we'll move forwards. So, look, it wasn't great, was it really? Did he do a really good job either? I think this is the takeaway for me, is that Hamilton didn't seem especially happy with the communication, and maybe that's inevitable. The reality is, the regular stuff during the race doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Okay, he was over-communicating things to Hamilton. Hamilton was like, look, leave me to it. And he wanted a certain level of communication. Okay, fine, whatever. They can figure that out. The problem really came here, didn't it? When the rain was striking and Ferrari had to make the call as to whether they box or whether they do not box. And Adami's on the radio saying, well, Hamilton asks him, is more rain coming, right? Is it going to get worse? And his race engineer comes back and says, negative, it's just this. Hopefully, let's see. It's not raining, or it's still raining in the pit lane, he says. So, this is just the full Ferrari experience, right? And I think this type of Grand Prix, it extracts the true Ferrari to some degree, and in this case, it's arguably the worst of Ferrari. But when you've got your race engineer on the radio being like, yeah, hopefully it stops, I'm like, well, tell me, is it stopping or not? Am I boxing? Am I not boxing? I have no information compared to you guys. Give me the call. And Ferrari, it's just, one of those moments where, as Vasseur says, in Australia, we didn't see the real Ferrari. In China, we start from scratch. Okay, maybe they didn't see the real car performance they would have wanted, but in terms of the real Ferrari, what Ferrari are all about, in many respects, I think we did see that in Australia, as unfortunate as that is for the entire team. Also worth noting, the car was slower. We talked about the wet setup, potentially, that they were employing, and there was, a theory that maybe that's what they are up to in terms of they changed the car setup, qualifying wasn't as good, they might have been setting the car up for the rain. Apparently, they were not really doing that. It was more that they had to raise the ride height of the car because they were worried about floor wear and plank wear. So that apparently is why they lost performance. Leclerc was slower, and I think Hamilton too. in some of the sectors, he was slower in quali than he was in free practice too, which, shows like that shouldn't be the case. So that's the rumor anyway, that actually it wasn't that they set the car up for the wet and got it wrong. It was that they had to raise the ride height and suffer performance because they were worried about the wear on the plank, which is not ideal by any means, to be honest. And of course, McLaren right now are looking rather strong. I thought this was pretty funny from Toto. He was looking at the timing screens. He was looking for Russell. He was looking for Antonelli. And he was also looking at Hamilton, but he was like, hang on a second, that's not my driver anymore. But it's obviously been a very long time as that partnership has unfolded. But let's talk about the battle at the front. Presumably, Ferrari will figure it out at some point again, get into the mix. They almost always do. Mercedes, I think, on certain weekends can be a force, and Max Verstappen is always going to be there with the McLarens, at least for now. Lando admitted that he has the best car, but maybe not admitted by as much as he would, as many other fans, let's say, would have liked. But at the end of the day, does it really matter? If Lando delivers like he did on Sunday more consistently, then he will be a very deserving champion. Now, Red Bull are excited to some degree about Max's performance. Now, again, Lawson was having a stinker. Unfortunately, that just seems to be how it is at Red Bull. I'm not sure I did crown a donkey of the day yesterday. I mean, it might have to go to Lawson. In terms of the entire weekends, it probably does have to be Lawson. For yesterday, unfortunately, it probably does have to be Isaac Hadjar, maybe putting it into the wall the way he did. That was not great, let's say. And also, Alonso, I did want to mention that Alonso's crash was caused by Gasly went off just before and put a load of gravel onto the track, and then Alonso came round, hit the gravel, and then spun. So it wasn't really even fully Alonso's fault, that one. But, it was just a race of attrition, let's say, in many respects. But Horner says that the RB21 doesn't have the nasty snaps of the predecessor. It's a good dynamic platform that we can develop the car on throughout the season. There was also a talk the other day from Red Bull that the 3rd and the 5th Grand Prix, somewhere around then, they are intending to bring a substantial upgrade that potentially can take them to where McLaren are presently. And obviously with Verstappen in hand anyway, with the Verstappen factor or whatever Red Bull are often talking about now. But there may be something which pegs McLaren back to some degree, and that is the Mini-DRS technical directive. Now, we heard talk about this after testing, and there was reports that they were going to put sensors on the cars in Australia, and then they would decide what they were going to do about it. Reportedly, the FIA are furious that the teams are getting around this stuff, and therefore they are clamping down now with a very severe technical directive. This is what we are talking about. Here is the rear wing of the McLaren and what we are considering the Mini-DRS slot gap. Now, it's not exactly what they were doing last year. The Mini-DRS before was obviously, I'll find an image of you guys. I'll find an image of it right about here, actually. Here we go. This is what they were doing last year, remember, in Baku, and the FIA and McLaren were like, okay, we'll stop, my bad. But it's the piece on the left which is now causing a bit of the controversy because they clamped down on this part that McLaren were using last year, but there may still be a way to exploit some of the gap on the other side, which they didn't necessarily clamp down on in the way that they could have done. So the FIA are not happy with teams doing this, and McLaren are, as it stands, the chief culprit, we think. Now, it may just be because they're getting more spotlight than the other teams, and actually, it's not like this gap can't exist and will never exist. It does exist, and that's okay. It's more about whether the flexibility at speed means that you can actually increase this gap at speed more so than the FIA would like. That, it seems, is what McLaren are doing. It's actually really difficult to notice this on the broadcast or even in footage, like video footage of the wing. It's really difficult to really see much flexing at all. But the FIA, they put sensors on the cars. They see that the teams are doing this, and they're exploiting a loophole that they are not at all happy with. Is this a massive game changer? In my head, I can't imagine that it's making a world of difference because last year's Mini-DRS was worth maybe 3 kph in a straight line, which is substantial for sure. I mean, what's this worth? 1, 2 kph? It may be significant, but is it, massively game-changing? If you get rid of this on the McLaren, does it mean their car no longer works and is no longer fast? No, there's obviously many reasons in the suspension and the floor and the other areas where McLaren have worked very hard, and in the brake duct, which has been a big talking point lately. So how much of a difference this makes is a debate, but Red Bull think it matters, to say the very least. So the FIA say, having analysed footage from the rear wing deformations combined to the static deflections measured inside the FIA garage, the FIA has concluded that sufficient grounds exist for a tougher test to be introduced from the forthcoming Chinese Grand Prix. It's pretty rare that the race happens and literally for the next Grand Prix, they say, okay, we're clamping down on this. Now, this is pretty interesting. So what they're doing is they're taking the gap that is allowed from 2 millimeters down to 0.5 millimeter, and then in Japan they're raising it lower again down to 1/4 millimeter in terms of gap deflection. So this is the way that they're going to do it. They're going to put a symmetric load of 750 newtons on the rear wing, and the maximum slot gap that's going to be allowed is going to go from 2 millimeters in that case down to 0.5 millimeters, which is, I mean, think about that, like that is not much at all. So they're effectively trying to eliminate entirely any of the flexibility in this domain that teams, especially McLaren, are currently playing around with. So very interesting development, right? Like, it's a pretty big deal. People are drawing up the McLaren rear wing because that's the one that's been noted the most. Are other teams doing it as well? The answer is probably, but probably not to the extent that McLaren presently are. And Helmut Marko and Red Bull are pretty confident this is going to help them. It may not be a complete game changer, but that's at least my feeling. But who knows? Maybe this is more significant than we initially think because, Red Bull believe this will affect the competition and will help them to some degree. And one of the reasons why Red Bull are confident they can actually close the gap to the McLaren. What other teams are doing this? Who knows? I mean, reportedly Ferrari have been playing around with it as well. I guess time will tell. But reportedly McLaren have been using this, and the FIA are not happy with teams getting around some of the rules. So they are trying to make sure that on this one they win. And well, in China it's going to be a big deal, right? Because you've now got a rear wing that you've got to change, presumably in some substantial aspect, in just a few days, and it's not exactly easy. Let's say going from Australia to China is not the easiest route, let's say, when you've got a factory back home and you've got parts that can be changed back home and everything like that. If you're going from, let's say, Silverstone to, I don't know, Budapest or something, or to Spa, okay, you hop back home to the factory that they've got, maybe you do some changes, you go back. But it's like what happened last year with Williams, where they had the big crashes in Australia, and it was a nightmare to send everything back to the UK, get it fixed, and then send it out again to the next Grand Prix, also in the far side of Asia. So, intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Just wanted to mention this real quick. I mean, this got 20,000 or 27,000 likes on Twitter. This is the front brake duct of the McLaren. We talked about it the other day, and reportedly finding a way to use the air from the brakes, the hot air from the brakes, to either, well, heat up the tyres where necessary and keep them in a nice stable window. There is a theory, and we will get to this, I'm sure, more over the coming days, as to exactly how McLaren are generating this performance right now. Because, Horner, it is the classic Red Bull. When a team is beating them, they say that they're cheating, and maybe that's fair enough, I don't know. But Horner basically says it's very strange that McLaren can simultaneously warm up the tyres well and still have very little wear. Normally, one thing comes at the expense of another. So, it is an interesting assessment, really, as to what exactly they're doing with this and what other teams aren't doing and whether it's legal or illegal or whatever. But I know that many people are looking at McLaren and saying it is a bit too good to be true. I think time will tell on this one, but very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.